Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one-on-one on Talking Feds. So with the vigil over whether President Biden will step down from the ticket comes all manner of speculation, including a sort of adolescent, you could say, excitement at the possibility of a completely open and brokered convention. I've just been reading about the 1860 convention where a dark horse named Abraham Lincoln surged to the nomination, and it's understandable why people are enamored of it. But perhaps the country's foremost expert on Congress and the political process, that would be, of course, Norm Ornstein, doubts that it makes any good sense for the Democrats at all. He's got an op-ed in the LA Times about it, but agreed to talk to us about it, which will be one of many topics everyone will be buzzing about if, as appears likely, the president decides to step aside on the ticket. Norm Ornstein, thanks so much for joining.
Of course, Harry, anytime.
Okay. So you're not too thrilled, as someone who is hopeful that Donald Trump is not reelected the president, with the varying scenarios circulating about a possible brokered convention. Why not?
Here's the problem, Harry. You talked about 1860. In earlier decades, and even, in 1924, we had well over 100 ballots that went on for a couple of weeks. But that was before television, when radio didn't matter much. We're in a different world right now. And the fact is that people who think that they could wave a magic wand, come up easily with a nominee, and it could be the one that is the magic formula. What we hear about more than probably anything else is we'll get the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, joined with the incredible senator from Georgia, Raphael Warnock, and everything will be hunky-dory. There are so many problems with this. Every time we've had a contested convention, the last time we had multiple ballots was 1952. But even though you've had in every convention since the nominee chosen on the first ballot, there were lots of horrible divisions within parties that exploded at the convention and got exacerbated thereafter. I'll just run through a couple of them quickly. 1964, the Republicans nominated Barry Goldwater. He was in a tough contest with Nelson Rockefeller, the governor of New York. Then Rockefeller got divorced in a time when that was shocking and got remarried. He was out of the picture. They tried at the 11th hour, the more mainstream Republicans, to get the Pennsylvania governor, Bill Scranton. That failed. Rockefeller was booed off the podium. And a number of conservatives said that they wanted to basically purge the party of those apostates. It didn't help Goldwater, put it that way. But, take a different case. In 1976, Gerald Ford was the incumbent president. He went into their convention in Kansas City with nobody having a majority of delegates. He and Ronald Reagan were both within striking distance. And in the end, while Ford prevailed on the first ballot, a substantial number of members of the right wing of the Republican Party talked about leaving and forming their own party. And the differences there, and the fact that it was so tight to begin with, and that he got ripped at his own convention for not being conservative enough, not being loyal enough. He lost by a very small margin, and that could make a difference. For Democrats, let's just talk about the one, Chicago 1968. We don't even have to get into detail for a sophisticated audience, but it divided the Democratic Party horribly, and Hubert Humphrey, who emerged as the nominee, was behind instead of a convention bump, which is often what happened back in the day. He got the opposite effect. He came back within an eyelash of winning, but if the convention had been different, he probably would have been elected president and the world would be different.
Well, let's keep talking, but I just want to interject and make sure. So the basic worry, and keeping in mind that the plural of anecdote is not data, as my son is fond of saying, is that nevertheless, any kind of brokered convention couldn't possibly culminate in a kumbaya moment, there would be blood on the floor, resentment, a divided party, and with the uphill climb as of now against Donald Trump, that will make the Democrats' prospects more remote. Is that the sort of thesis?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with everything that the historian Alan Lichtman has said in his 13 Keys to the Presidency. But one of the most prominent ones is that if you have a divided party convention, you are very likely to lose. There's another part of this, though, that I think is also important. For all the flaws in the contemporary system that we have, really was set in place because of the divisions in 1968. George McGovern headed the commission. We, opened up the primary system. It became the primary vehicle. And it's far from perfect, to say the least. But one thing that happens in that system, and one of the reasons that every convention ends up with a first ballot nominee, is you go through a very lengthy vetting process. You have lots of debates. You have lots of in-person campaigning across a series of states. For candidates who fall by the wayside, and they can start with large numbers of them, because they don't catch on, they can't get enough of a following in early states, the money dries up. Nobody can argue plausibly that they were shafted by the party establishment, that it was an illegitimate action, that they actually should have been able to win. And by the time you get through this lengthy vetting process, and of course you probe these candidates, they probe each other, but you end up with one, and the convention almost always has all of the losing candidates join together with others, and you have a united party, with the convention being a kind of jump-off point for the fall campaign. If we did something like an open process here, we're going to have at most 4 weeks. You're going to have a bunch of candidates who we're not expecting to be candidates, do not have teams in place, have not really worked this through in many instances. They're going to, maybe they'll have a few mini debates. If you get to a convention with 8 or 10 candidates, and let's face it, Harry, if this is an opening, you're going to have everybody who wants to be a president think.
That's right. Otherwise, they have to wait 8 years. Their time, yeah.
You could wait at minimum 8 years.
Right.
And, you're going to multiple ballots. The press would love it. The Republicans would love it. But you're not going to end up in a good place. And remember, that place could include basically bypassing the heir apparent, the sitting vice president, a woman of color, and end up with a lot of harsh feelings. But you're also not going to be able to vet candidates who on the surface look fantastic. But, running for governor, running for the Senate is a very different process. If you don't go through the fire of all of those different contests, primaries in different places, debating a bunch of other candidates to see who can stand out over a lengthy period of time, dropping one by one, you're going to have chaos. And I think that's true, even if the other alternative, which I think is the only plausible one, if you don't simply, assuming that Biden withdraws, fall
all right.
back
And so let's move
Kamala
to
Harris.
that. I'll add one point about post 68, which is it gives a much bigger role to the people, to the rank and file. I've just done a little bit of tweeting about what is happening out there, and invariably it draws really vicious responses about people who feel like it would be very out of joint at the notion that the elites in the party would somehow anoint. But yes, you were on to it seems to me, does your argument prove too much in the sense that it says there's only one person out there who's gone through that process? That is Joe Biden, who we're assuming would be stepping down. So whoever is done or anointed in this other process that isn't a brokered convention, likewise won't have been vetted by the American people, likewise may have all kinds of secret things for the Republican attack machine to go after and the like. So you were just about to talk to the only alternative there, but could you include, please, your sense of whether the downsides, the big downsides of the brokered convention somehow don't apply to this other scenario?
Sure, but before I do that, let me just take issue with the term broker convention.
Yeah, I'm
We
sorry.
did
Very
have
good point. Please explain. Yeah.
we had those in the past. What happened in the past was that you used to have a unit rule. Now, what did that mean? It meant that the delegates from a state, if a majority of them said, we're going to support a particular candidate, everybody had to support that candidate. Before the primary system, you used to have a very different way of choosing delegates. You had a process that was dominated by party bosses or leaders in the state, governors, for example. They could handpick enough delegates that they could basically have the cards in their hands. It's like sitting down and you got the cards and you can negotiate with others who have a similar ability to move the pieces around. I'll give you this state, you give me something else. That's disappeared. There are no brokers. All of these delegates who are going to come to this convention are, for the most part, individual actors. Maybe they'll respond to a importuning leader, a governor, a senator, whatever it may be, but you can't be sure of that. So you can't go through a process where a handful of power brokers can say, okay, let's cut this deal, and here you be the pick the presidential candidate. This one will be the vice presidential candidate.
And this guy will be the Secretary of Defense. You can't. There's not that trading ability as there was in 1860, which I'm reading about, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And so you're going to have chaos in effect for a long period of time. Now, there's an alternative, but the alternative is far from perfect. The alternative is that instead of opening it up to everybody, you basically have an agreement. You'd have to have the candidates and potential candidates all agreeing that we're going to narrow this down to 3 or 4 in a very abbreviated process. You can't go more than 3 weeks. Maybe you'll have 5 debates with these 3 candidates. Then you'll go to the convention, and you'd almost have to bring in ranked choice voting so that you're not going to have 50 ballots. So that, if you have 3, one of them will drop out on the first ballot, and then you'll be able to choose on the second, and then you're done. Now, the downsides to that, first of all, 3 weeks to really dig deeply into whether you want people, most of whom are not well known nationally. You're going to get all the criticism that in this case, it was the power brokers behind the scenes who decided who was in and who was out. And no doubt some of the potential candidates are going to be disgruntled by that. You're not going to be able to just force them or have them of their own free will say, I'll sacrifice so that we can get through all of this. And you're not getting the vetting that you really need. You run for the Senate, you run for governor. Those are big, tough contests. It's not the same thing, especially when we know that whoever emerges is going to have $100 million or more targeted by dark money groups to slime whoever the nominee is.
Who, unless it's Harris, won't have the $100 million to fight back unless they spend half their time getting it, right?
Right. And of course, the other thing about the having a candidate who emerges who's not Biden or Harris is that it's very tricky to get access to the money, which is a big sum of money that's already in the Biden-Harris campaign coffers. And they have signed leases for offices all around the country. They've hired people to be their campaign managers and advance people. And you're going to have to start all that from scratch with very limited time. Now, that's
why doesn't this all scream out Plan C? That is Kamala Harris. No messing around.
It does. And of course, there's nothing great about this. You're going to have plenty of people who will say you're taking away the choice from the people. Although, of course, Joe Biden's argument, 13 million people voted for me. Those 13 million also voted for her. And the only way I believe that this would work, practically speaking, is Biden has to voluntarily say, I've looked at all of this and I now have come to the conclusion that I must withdraw, and then say, we are going to go forward with our team intact. The only difference is that instead of me being at the top, it'll be Kamala Harris with her choice for vice president, and I will back it fully. And I will go to the convention and make that case. And then I think you could be in a stronger position. Not that we don't realize that while she's been tested in different ways, including running a presidential campaign herself that did not end well, and being a vice president where you know what it's like to be in that room when the decisions are made. She's got a long history, which is good in some ways. Top prosecutor in California, senator before moving here. But you know that there are going to be little things that are going to be picked at by the others. They will slime her in the same way that they were going after Joe Biden, except with different issues. But she's tough enough and strong enough, I think, if she has the right team around her, and she has to draw heavily from that Biden campaign team to make it through. And it changes the trajectory of this election, I believe. So that's the only good choice, the least worst choice available.
Is it? Okay. So look, this is developing so quickly. Hopefully we'll talk more, but you've laid out three choices, and one you've definitively rejected, the so-called open convention. So could there be a mini, 3-week campaign with a few people, or could there be just Harris? I won't ask you to make that ultimate prediction. It depends, among other things, on decision makers that aren't, who knows what process they are pursuing. But let me just ask you, what's for the if there's going to be any chance for the person who emerges to beat Donald Trump, when need this occur by?
I think if it doesn't occur by the early part of this next week, that it's a huge problem. Right now, we're in the worst of all possible worlds. We have a president who has dug in his heels, understandably so. And, I suspect that he watched Donald Trump's speech, as such as it is, at the convention. And his conclusion is, I can beat the crap out of this guy. And remember that since the convention ended, we've had more prominent lawmakers say, you got to go, including some who had backed him strongly. If this goes on for another 2 weeks, while a substantial number of prominent political figures, many of them running for office themselves, have taken a stand that Joe Biden cannot and should not be running, and he's still running, it's a horror show, frankly. So, maybe you somehow turn this around, and he turns this around, and everybody who said he ought to leave says, okay, we're going to have Biden, and we're all going to get behind him, and we're still going to make sure that we can prevail. It's a hard thing to imagine that happening at this stage, frankly. And I think they've got to resolve this probably over the weekend or by the earliest part of next week, whichever way they go. Even if it's a, truncated group of candidates with a streamlined process at the convention, you can't let that go until August 1st. You got to deal with it very, very soon. And I assume that all kinds of people who are significant in the life of Joe Biden are out making that case to him. And I know he'll be resistant, and I understand it. He's had an incredibly successful presidency. He wants to, as he has said, finish the job. But there are bigger things at work here. Just finally, I'll say, if this happens, if Joe Biden ends up saying Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I've looked at this. I've looked at myself in the mirror. I am going to finish my term. I am determined to make sure that my term as president ends as successfully as possible. We got a lot of things to do, but it's not good for me to move to a second term. And so I am turning over the reins. If that happens, and then Joe Biden shows up at the convention in Chicago, you will have the most rapturous reception for a president that I think we will have ever seen at a convention, far more than what Donald Trump got. And Joe Biden will go down as somebody who, under the most adverse of circumstances, had a more successful presidency than any president, at least since Lyndon Johnson, in terms of the difference he's made for people in the country, the accomplishments he's achieved. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society was incredible, but it was done with enormous majorities in both houses. What Biden accomplished was done first with the narrowest majorities possible, including an even 50-50 Senate and no Republican support. Johnson actually got some Republican support for many of his initiatives. And then after that, with an adversarial, radical, lunatic House trying to block everything. And he's navigated through that remarkably. And he will go down in history in an extraordinarily favorable way. If he doesn't, then he will only be remembered for staying in selfishly and bringing the whole ship down with him if he loses. And, we can never predict ahead. Things can turn around, but you can't wait and base this on hope. You have to make a decision now.
Wow. Yeah, it's hard to take issue with any of that. In particular, what legacy awaits him if he in fact bucks what's becoming now the entire party faithful. Norm Ornstein, your expertise and experience with Congress and the political system are really invaluable in these crazy days. Hope we'll be able to turn to you frequently as some history, as you say, can't predict it, unfolds in the coming weeks, days, hours. Thank you so much.
Sure, Harry. I hope to see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.